get going.
Good evening. Dr. Henry Jekyll was a respected, honorable, and distinguished man. There was a mark of kindness about him. Well-made, smooth-faced, and handsome. Throughout London, he was well regarded as a doctor and a gentleman. His handsome home, with its warm, flickering fires and polished cabinets, gave a great air of wealth and comfort. It had a laboratory attached to it, where he often worked late at night. On one such night, he surveyed his research. He had a secret theory, which he studied endlessly, that every person was truly two people. His own life was one of profound duplicity. With a morbid sense of shame, he concealed the worst parts of himself. He thought, how wonderful, he thought. If the part of me that is upright and steadfast could no longer be tempted by disgrace, and the part of me that is evil could be delivered from remorse, life would be better if both might go his own separate ways. At last, Jekyll was ready to put his theory to the test. In his laboratory, he compounded a drug which might allow him to change his natural body. With it would substitute a separate, second body and face. Such a powerful substance could kill him easily. But the power of discovery was too great, though. He at last overcame his fear of death. He combined the elements and watched them boil and smoke in the glass. As a final element, he added a powdered salt, of which he had purchased a large quantity. The mixture was at first a deep red, then began to brighten in color. It bubbled and hissed and began to throw off fumes of vapor. Changed to a dark purple when suddenly the boiling ceased. Finally, the potion faded to a watery green. Jekyll gathered his courage, brought the glass up to his lips, and drank it all. The pain overcame him suddenly. He staggered, clutching at the table, then held on, gasping with open mouth. His face and features began to melt and alter. Oh, he felt a grinding in his bones, and a deadly nausea overcame him. The agony and horror was worse than dying. Suddenly, the pain ceased, and Jekyll felt indescribably new. He felt younger, lighter, happier. He was smaller. His clothing hung loosely on his body. Hair covered his face and hands, growing thick and wild. Looking into the mirror, he saw mean, angry eyes and a twisted smile on a frightening, ugly face. At last, he knew this face and welcomed it. This too was him, the part of himself he felt the need to hide for so many years. He named himself Edward Hyde. Hyde was utterly different than Jekyll. Hyde was smaller and walked quickly, while Jekyll was large and walked slowly. Where Jekyll's voice was light and gentle, Hyde's voice was low and gruff. The one thing that remained the same was his handwriting. As morning came, he once again mixed together the potion and drank it all. Again, the pain overcame him. When he finally stood, he was once again Henry Jekyll.
Before long, Hyde was off on his adventures nightly. Jekyll rented a room for him in the poorest part of town where Hyde could sleep. And because Hyde was so much smaller than Jekyll, he also bought him a new wardrobe. Why is Hyde smaller, Jekyll wondered. It must be because I have been good for most of my life, and so the evil side is less robust. The disguise was perfect. All Hyde had to do was step into Jekyll's laboratory and in a second or two mix and swallow the potion, and then whatever Hyde had done, it would disappear like fog on a mirror. And instead, Jekyll would be quietly at home and beyond suspicion. Dr. Jekyll at first made haste to seek every worldly pleasure in his disguise. His actions were unthinkable and depraved. In the hands of Henry Jekyll, even the smallest pleasure turned toward the monstrous. His every thought and action centered only on himself. He delighted in the suffering of others. One dark winter night, a child crossed Hyde's path, and without a second's hesitation, he knocked her to the ground, trampling over her, leaving her alone and screaming on the ground. At times, Dr. Jekyll was horrified by Hyde's actions, and he would work during the day to undo the evil done by Hyde when it was possible. But he told himself, Hyde is a separate person, and it is Hyde and Hyde alone that is guilty. After a long night out adventuring as Hyde, he always came home and drank the potion that turned him back into Dr. Jekyll. And so, His conscience slumbered. One morning, after a very long night out adventuring, Dr. Jekyll awoke in his bed with a somewhat odd sensation. He opened his eyes, looked around the room. The familiar bed curtains hung against the mahogany frame. The tall ceilings and the ornate furniture looked the same as always. And then his eye fell upon his hand, and a sudden terror filled his heart. This was not the long, slender, smooth hand of Henry Jekyll. No, this was a thick, hairy hand. He bounded from his bed and rushed to the mirror. At the sight that met his eyes, his blood turned to ice. Yes, he had gone to bed as Henry Jekyll, but he had awakened as Mr. Hyde. He raced toward the laboratory and drank down the potion, but this time it took not one but 2 glasses of the strange potion, hissing and bubbling, bone-shattering and utterly nauseating, to change back from Hyde to Jekyll. In the beginning it had been much harder to become Hyde, but now, as he was returning to the body of Dr. Jekyll, he realized it was becoming much harder to return to Jekyll. Hyde was getting stronger. The next morning, Jekyll sat in his study with a frown on his face, having his breakfast. Hyde would destroy Jekyll. Of that he was sure. He realized that he was slowly losing his original and better self and becoming intertwined with the second and worse. He had a decision to make. He knew that Hyde would destroy Jekyll, and so he thought, that's it. From now on, I am only Dr. Jekyll, he decided. No more Mr. Hyde.
Dr. Jekyll was true to his determination. He lived his upright life with more severity than ever, and bade farewell to the freedoms and youth he enjoyed in his disguise of Hyde. Full of honest hope, and surrounded by friends, he returned to the simple life as a doctor. He worked steadfastly at his scientific endeavor, and was rewarded with an approving conscience. Over time, though, his strength faded. Doing good became a dull thing. The memory of his frightening experience faded. Instead, he was tortured with the feeling that Hyde was struggling for his freedom. After 2 months of holding fast, Jekyll once again crept to his lab and mixed that potion, adding the special salt last of all. It bubbled and hissed, smelling horrid and steamy as it changed from red to purple to green. He eagerly swallowed it all. The devil had long been caged, and he came out roaring. Hyde had grown stronger in his absence. He dressed, taking his heavy cane as he walked out the door for a night of debauchery. He walked down the lane and soon noticed a kindly old man approaching him. "Pardon me, sir," the old gentleman said. The moon shone on him, lighting his face, making him seem innocent and sweet. "I seem to have lost my way." It was a simple request, yet it filled Hyde with fury. He broke into a great flame of anger, stomping his foot and brandishing his cane. The old man took a step back with the air of one very much surprised and a trifle hurt. At that, Hyde broke out of all bounds and clubbed the man to the earth. Hyde mauled the man, tasting delight in every throw. Hyde clubbed the man, under which the bones were audibly shattered. The next moment, Hyde trampled the man underfoot. He didn't stop until he heard the horrified screams of a woman from across the street. Looking up at her, he recognized her as a maid from Jekyll's house. "Help! Police!" the woman screamed. "Edward Hyde has murdered this man!" He fled the scene, feeling ecstatic and gloating in his crime. With his song upon his lips, he lightheartedly planned more crimes for the future. When he returned to his lab and mixed the potion, he raised his glass in a toast to the old man. He drank. The pain of the transformation had not passed before Jekyll fell upon his knees, tears of remorse streaming down his face. He lifted his clasped hands to God. Again and again he saw the horrors of the evening. He tried to smother the hideous images and sounds of his memory. But still, he felt the depth of his sin in his soul. Sorrow filled his heart. He resolved to redeem himself, to labor, to help the needy. But there was a sense of joy. You see, the problem had now been solved. If Hyde appeared again, even for an instant, he would surely be immediately punished for his horrible crime. Becoming Hyde was now impossible, whether he wanted to do it or not.
The days passed quickly as Dr. Jekyll once again returned to his work. He endeavored continually to make better the lives of others. Oh, Hyde was still inside of him, chained up and trapped, but Jekyll knew there was no way he could let Hyde out. And he enjoyed his work more completely than he ever had before. One fine January day, Dr. Jekyll visited the park near his home. The ground beneath his feet was wet with melted slush.
but the sky was cloudless. He sat on a bench in the sun, listening to the winter birds chirping and thinking about spring. Suddenly, he was overwhelmed by horrid nausea and deadly shuddering and faintness. He looked down and saw that the clothes on his body fell lifelessly on him, and his hand on his knee was small and dark and hairy. He was once again Edward Hyde. A moment before he had been safe, but now he was a known murderer. He needed to change. But the ingredients to his potion was locked in his laboratory. If he went home as Hyde, his servants would call the police. He needed someone else to go and get the ingredients for him, but who and how? Dashing into an alley to avoid being spotted, he passed to the door of his colleague and friend, Dr. Lanyon, and an idea occurred to him. Getting a pen and paper out of his coat pocket, he quickly wrote, "Dear Lanyon, my life depends on you. Go at once to my house and show this letter to my butler so he will let you into my laboratory. There, you will find a drawer marked with the letter E. It contains some liquids and powders in a glass. Bring the drawer and all its ingredients with you to your house. Then at midnight, you will hear a knock at your door. It will be a small man who will say he has come from me. Give him the drawer. This is all I need you to do, and if you do not do it, I will surely die. Please help me. Your friend, Henry Jekyll." He quickly took the note and to his friend's house and slid it underneath the front door. Then he went back to the alley to wait, alone with his fears. Finally, night had finally come, and the clock towers struck out 12 o'clock. He hurried to his friend's door, knocking rapidly. As the door opened, he looked and he saw a policeman coming up the street from the other end, and he entered quickly. "I am here for Henry Jekyll. Have you got it?" Hyde demanded. "Come, sir," said Dr. Lanyon, taken back by Hyde's gruffness. Hyde put his hand to his throat, fighting back the approaching hysteria. "I understand. There is a drawer." "Well, there it is," said Lanyon, "on the floor behind the table." Hyde sprang over the table and with shaking hands mixed the ingredients together, stirring in the red liquid and finally adding the mysterious salt, noting the small amount remaining. "Remember, Lanyon," as Hyde lifted the glass to his lips, "you are a doctor and you cannot say anything to anyone about what you are about to see." He drank the mixture down in one gulp and immediately felt the pain and terror of the transformation. Lanyon screamed. There, before him, stood Henry Jekyll.
Jekyll, returned home and woke the next morning, shaken and weak. He feared the thought that what slept inside him. He was once again home, with his laboratory close by, but he could not forget the horrors of last night. Walking downstairs to breakfast, he was suddenly seized with the indescribable sensations that heralded the change. He barely had time to run to the lab before he was once again raging with the passions of Hyde. It took 3 glasses of the potion to return himself to Jekyll. And just 6 hours after that, as he sat looking into the fire, the pain returned. He had to swallow yet more of the potion. And it quickly began to feel like a great effort of gymnastics to be able to wear the face of Jekyll. All hours of the night and day, he would be taken with a telltale shudder. Above all, if he slept or even dozed for just a moment, it was always Hyde that he awakened. Very soon, sleeplessness began to cause Jekyll to grow sickly, weak, and feverish. Hyde hated Jekyll. He thought him loathsome and weak. But Hyde was terrified of the thought of being hung for his crimes. So he drank the potion, returning back to Jekyll. The curious white powder, the special salt, began to run low. Jekyll sent his butler to get a fresh supply. He mixed the potion, but nothing. Jekyll sent his butler to every chemist in London, but the fresh powder did not work. It was all in vain. Jekyll realized the impurity of the original first potion, and that impurity allowed him to transfer from one existence to another. Finally, he mixed the last of the old powder. For the last time, the accursed potion hissed and bubbled, frothed and foamed. He watched it change color from red to purple to green. Knowing that this glass contained Henry Jekyll's final living moments, he swallowed the hateful mixture and wept. With only hours remaining before the potion wore off, Jekyll wrote his confession, detailing everything that he did, every horrid moment of Hyde's existence, except how to make the potion. He would not doom another, he thought, as he sealed his writing. Jekyll sat in a chair next to the cold, empty fireplace, shuddering and weeping. With a glass of poison next to him, he thought, would Hyde be punished for his crimes and hung, or would he die in this very room? Suddenly he was overtaken with the pain and nausea of the transformation. For the last time, Henry Jekyll called out as the transformation took hold. He watched as his hands turned from long and slender and slim, small, thick and hairy. He reached for the poison, and in that moment he knew whatever Hyde did, this would be the last moment of Henry Jekyll. Thank you.